Hey everyone, Ekman here with another video, and today we have a top 32 breakdown for the Oceania 2024 finals for the One Piece card game. And this video ended technically a couple hours ago as of recording, but I wanted to make this video as soon as I could. There's a lot of interesting leaders that were able to get into the top 32, and there's also some interesting builds for some of the more established leaders that we would have expected to get in this anyways. So before we start though, if you guys are new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe. It does help the channel quite a lot, and we do make a lot of content for the One Piece card game. And also, if you guys want any deck lists for this event or many others, you can make sure to find them on my website, Eggman Events, which is linked to the description as well. There's also a link to the live stream on the website as well as in the description, so you guys can make sure to check that out. And I also want to thank TAC Games for not only hosting and running this event, but also for publishing the deck list, which made it a lot easier to make this this page and video compared to what I usually have to do. So I do appreciate them there, and just all the support as always. So, but going into more details for this event in particular, it was 980 players with 10 rounds of Swiss best of 1 into a top 32 cut best of 3 for day number 2. And of the top 32, we do have 9 copies of Doflamingo, which were first and second. So there was a Doflamingo finals or mirror match finals there. 7 copies of Stardeck 13 Luffy, 4 copies of Lucci, which I will say that I think these 3 leaders are the strongest ones in this game right now. So it's not too surprising they take 2/3 of the top 32 for this event. And then we've got a couple of the more unique leaders, are less performing ones. So we do have 3 copies of Marshal.D.Teach, which hasn't been topping at every event. So seeing 3 copies of it is really interesting. 2 copies of Purple Luffy, 2 Boas, this is the first time in the English OP09 meta that Boa has been able to get a top. We also have 2 Namis, 1 Enel, 1 Betty, and then also 1 Shanks, which I do think it's interesting to see Shanks getting 1 copy, and it also did get in the top 32, so got knocked out in round 1 of day number 2. But it's one of the finals in Latin America. It's won a big treasure cup here in North America. So to see the leader only get 1 finish, I think is pretty remarkable, and we'll talk about it more when we get there. I also think there's a little bit of an absence of a jewelry Bonnie leader, which is generally, we get a couple of those usually in most of these top cuts, even though I won't say it's the best leader in the game. I do think it's something that I would expect to top at least 1 or 2 copies per event in this season. So to see no copies of it, I think is also pretty remarkable. I will go over some of the deck list too, but I do want to say I don't currently have the leader data for this event in general. That's generally a little bit harder to do in kind of by a tournament by tournament basis. I'm going to try my best to get it, and if I do, I'll make sure to have a pinned comment saying that the website's been updated, but I'm going to try my best. No guarantees. I'm going to say likely, it's unlikely, but I do want to get that data if it does exist, because it is really cool to see some of the conversion rates from leaders that people are playing to see how well they actually kind of convert into the top 32. But with that aside, we are going to go over the top placing list for each one of these leaders for this top 32, starting off with our first and second place, which is Jasper and Braden respectively. And I do know I kind of prefaced this video with, oh, there's some unique leaders for some of these older leaders or more established leaders. These maybe not so much, I would say, for Doflamingo, right? We kind of know what these decks look like right now, right? It's like 45 cards the same between a lot of them. There's some kind of minor ratio changes depending on like what 1-drops you want to play, and also like what events you want to play. We decided both on Perfume, Femur, and Tiger at 1 and 2 copies and 2 and 2 copies respectively between first and second place. I haven't seen as much Gum Gum Red Rock lately. I think people are just generally using those. Most people are playing Jozu, but I think that is a little bit of a decision card. Some people play to 2 to 4 copies, but you don't have to run it. And other than that, it's just pretty standard for what these decks look like, right? There are some more like unique builds down the line if you guys want to see. I did see, I remember like the 4-drop Star Deck Croc. Some people were playing a couple copies of that too, but we know what these decks look like. Doesn't mean that you can't just, you can walk into this, right? Doflamingo does have a lot of sequencing, and I think that both their players of Jasper and Braden did a really good job to get first and second place respectively. There's just not a lot to talk about. There's nothing new about Doflamingo, I think, right now. It's just the best deck in the format for a reason, very strong, and there's just a lot of good players with kind of 1 and 2 card changes based on their own personal play style. So these are the builds here. Congratulations to both Jasper and Braden respectively for their first and second place finish. The next up we've got Stardeck 13 Luffy. So this is BigPotate, I believe is how it's pronounced, with their version of the deck. And I know you guys are already looking at a card and like, what does this card do? I've never seen this card in my life. It is the I Have My Crew card. So this came out of Stardeck 14, which is the kind of cost increase Luffy that we got a couple Star decks ago with all the remixed ones. But This says main, draw one card, and then up to one of your characters gain +3 costs until the end of your opponent's next turn. So this is like a really good cycle card. The fact that we are able to get that cycle, but I think this also lets you play like your 2-drop Luffy's, Sabos a little bit early, and then you can protect them against most effects in the game, right? Red isn't super popular, or if you're playing against something like Shanks, which obviously there's only one copy in the top 32. You probably can't play one of your 2-drops, but if you increase your 2 cost to a 5 cost body, it just means that Doflamingo can't really mess with it very easily, can't bounce it to hand. You get the cycle anyways, and I think it's a really interesting tech choice. There's probably a lot more situations that I'm not even thinking about. I'm seeing this card pretty much when you guys are, but I thought that was really interesting, and that did obviously help get the deck a little bit more consistent. We aren't playing the 1-drop Yellow Brothers event for searching. We're just trying to get some hard draw, which includes the Tempest Kick, which we're able to get 10 cards into our trash moderately quickly, I think, in this deck. So getting the cost reduction, being able to play out the Rocket Luffy, get the removal, and not have to lose any hand advantage, I think is very strong. And I think the other card that's worth mentioning is the Viola, which I know a lot of people have been kind of buying out the alt art for this one recently, but because of this finish. But it is kind of nice. It's a 2-drop blocker, and then on play, choose one. Look at all your opponent's life cards and place them back in their life area in any order, or you can turn all of your life cards face down. So why this is impactful is that you can have this kind of scenario where you are able to recycle your bodies, and then with your leader effect, and you play as Viola, and then you get the cards back to your hand. So it kind of resets your card advantage, which I think is really interesting. You kind of have to sequence it a specific way to be able to help you off of a Moria, because I don't think you can really. You'd have to like be at 0 life, use the effect first to put the cards there, and then you play Moria, and then you set them face down, and then maybe you play Viola and Sabo, you have 1 life back, and then you can have Rocket Luffy there to be able to get rid of Doflamingo. I have not tested this build. Obviously, it just came out, but I do think that there's some really interesting text for it. And Luffy's always been kind of a deck where you run the same 40 cards, right? The package is pretty secure in most of the cards, but I've been seeing a lot of creative builds in the last couple of weeks with different tech options. I think that Yellow and Black really has this unique synergy that lets you play these unique cards, and I think this is one of the more unique ones that I've seen recently, and it's really cool to see it get a top 4 finish as well. So this is the build here. Sorry, I got a 3rd place finish, more specifically. So this is BigPotate's version of the build. I have to try it myself. It looks really interesting, and congratulations for their 3rd place finish there. And then also we have Boa, which is a not so new leader, right? It came out in OP07, same time as the Rob Lucci leader. That's still very popular right now. But in case you guys forget what this leader says, affect your turn once per turn. This effect can be activated when a character is removed from the field by your own effect, or sorry, any effect. If you have 5 or less cards in your hand, you get to draw 1, right? So this also is a 7 Warlords of the Sea card, which is important for cards like the 4-cost Trafalgar Law, which means you are able to bounce something back to your hand and your opponent's hand. And then if you have 5 or less cards in your hand, you're able to get that additional card draw. So that is something impactful. I do know I've been talking to a lot of people who do believe in this leader, and I think it's something I'm going to have to test on a live stream or later this week, because I am really interested to see what this deck actually looks like in action, and doing some of my own testing with it. But it's obviously more of kind of like a value version of Doflamingo, right? Doflamingo is trying to be fast and aggressive, right? Being able to play a lot of bodies on board. But with Boa, it's really difficult for you to be able to like lose the advantage war, right? You're going to get tempo and also get card draw by giving your opponent negative tempo. So you don't really even lose out on resources, which is really nice. And then our top end, we are playing 3 copies of Red Rock and a copy of Raging Tiger, but we also are playing like Jozu, which obviously works really well with our leader effect as well. We have Boa Hancock, which can get like an additional like stun. We have the 7-cost Doflamingo from the Star Deck 3, the first wave of them, which is like all these effects like just bounce cards, right? Borsalino, same thing. Bottom decking a 4 or lower means you're able to bottom deck something from a Doflamingo deck, which is really impactful. And then lastly, we've got Kaido, which is really great for being able to get some like value. You have to like maybe bounce Moria back to the hand. Maybe that's not super good, but this is somewhat hard to remove. I think in every deck that's not Rob Lucci. It's really strong. And then also just being able to like it's a 10 drop 12k. It's a cool card that works with your leader effect really nicely. The other thing to kind of mention is that you will be able to like with the one drops that we have, like Kaya's and Goku's Buggy, right? We can use these cards and then we can use something like Jozu to bounce them back to our hand, which means we get our 2k back, but we can also filter our hand for cards we need, which is nice. Or like just find the 7 warlords that we need too. So I think this is a really unique build. I have to test it myself. I do think like the warlord package is really strong, and I know that Doflamingo is probably the best warlord leader we have right now, but there's a lot of other ones that exist right now, including Boa, and I think this is a really cool finish. So this is Noos' version of the build. Congratulations for their 4th place finish. I also do want to say there's another Boa Hancock. The build is pretty similar, but I do want to mention it too. The biggest differences from build is that we are just playing the Jozu and the Kaido, so we're not playing as much of like the 7 and 8, or what, just 7 costs? 7 costs? Yeah, 6 and 7 costs, but we are playing instead a little bit more removal from our event cards. We're playing 1 copy of Perfume, which I do think we gotta kind of play 1 copy of this, even though we're not as aggressive, and then a Gum Gum Rain to help declunk our hand a little bit. But it's really cool to see. Both decks are pretty similar. I'm not sure if they work together on their builds as of this recording, but it is cool to see both of them. So this is Zeka's. They got, I think, top 32. Yeah, top 32 with their build as well. So that is there. Congratulations to our bows for their top 32 finishes. And then next up, we've got Purple Luffy. So this is DoubleRainbow's version of the deck. And this has just been kind of a deck that's around. I know that I got a lot of support in the release of OP09 with cards like the Secret Rare Luffy. This card's been very strong. Just the fact that it's a 9-drop 10k with Rush that like draws us a card like the minus Dawn doesn't really affect us at all, since you can just lose 1. And if you're able to ramp into this and just play it on curve, it does a lot of damage. Most decks can't really remove this. This is a 10k beat stick that's just going to exist every turn for the rest of the game. And I think Purple Luffy is definitely one of the best leaders to take advantage of this card. And then other than that, I think the biggest issue with Purple Luffy has been the issue that it's always had, and it's consistency, right? We have more consistency tools than ever before. We have the 1-drop Trafalgar Law that lets us draw cards and find cards. We have Zorojuro, right? But if we don't find this card on curve, we just feel like we're just so behind. And when we're so tempo and aggressive leaning for a deck like this, it's so hard to make up lost time when we can't play the best card from our deck on the 7 Dawn turn, right? So outside of that, because that's going to happen not too often, but generally often, where you can't find the Luffy Taro, I think there's a lot of there's still gameplay for the deck, but it's just like you're not always in control with it, which has always been my issue with the deck. Is it's just you're kind of like, you have the chance to be the best deck in the game, but that's not really up to you most of the time, right? It's just depending on what cards you kind of see. But I do think this deck is really strong. I know a lot of people are on it. I think it's been a lot more popular in North America recently, and I know a lot of people are testing it too. There's not a lot more tech options, right? You got to play a lot of your purple Straw Hat cards. I know Bon Clay. I don't think this card is needed, but a lot of people are running this card. Maybe not at the full 4 copies. We're seeing it at 3 for this build. And then additionally, Gum Gum Giant's a broken card. Like every time I see this card, I need to mention that card is really, really silly. So I think Purple Luffy is still good. It's in a really good spot. I think the Doflamingo matchup is a little bit tough for it because you have to kind of race them, but you can get there. It's just, again, you have to find this card at the right time. So I expect to see Purple Luffy still doing well. It's been from this event compared to others, I think it's a little underrepresented, and I'm curious to see if it's going to continue to go back to what we've been seeing generally, or if this is an anomaly, or just kind of what's to come for the rest of this format too. But this is the Purple Luffy. Congratulations to DoubleRainbowZ for their finish there. And then next up, we've got Rob Lucci. So this is Poeydw. Some of these names I'm going to be struggling with, but this is their version of Rob Lucci. And one thing that I love to see is just how personalized this build is in general. We have so many different 1-drops or 1-ofs, right? We've got 1 Uta in this build. We've got 1 copy of Tashigi. We've got 1 copy of the 2K Kaku, 1 copy of the 5-drop, 2 copies of the zombie Luffy, right? Which does get some good removal and gets around KO protection, which is really nice. And then we also have 1 copy of Sabo, 1 copy of the 6-drop Brook, 1 Kaido, and then a couple of our more usual cards. But this deck is teched out, right? We've got like every tech that you can think of, we're playing like one of that, as long as we can fit it into the build. We've got a little bit more removal potential. We have ways to play around stuff. And even though like we're not as consistent, I think in some matchups, the fact that we have kind of options for a lot of unique scenarios, I think is something that's really appealing for a list like this one too. So I don't have much to say. Obviously, Rob Lucci's been around and very relevant since release in OP07, and there has been some changes with new card pool stuff and trying to counter stuff. I do think it's a deck that goes probably positive against Doflamingo. You have enough removal to keep up with the amount of 4-drops they have, but you still can get overwhelmed a little bit. I think Black Yellow Luffy's gotten a little bit of a resurgence from where it was at the beginning of the meta, where it was like arguably the best deck in OP08, at the end of OP08, and a lot of people switched off of it, I think, at the beginning of OP09, and then people are gradually coming back to it. With that being one of our worst matchups, that's going to hurt Rob Lucci more than it helps us. So it's going to be interesting to see where this kind of settles in general. I would say it's likely the third best deck in the format. I still think BY Luffy's the best deck right now, but this one's generally really good. It kind of helps gatekeeps a lot of other decks too, where I think we're kind of in a meta where there's some decks that just play a lot of big bodies, and Rob Lucci can definitely keep that in check too. So last thing is that if Blackbeard ever kind of finds a hold on this meta and gets a little bit more represented, that's a little bit tough for Lucci. It's not impossible, since we do have a lot of our own activate main removal, such as like the Jack as well as the Kaido, but because of that, we're not always going to see that, and it's going to be tougher for us to have that matchup around than if it didn't exist in the first place. But again, this is Poeydw's version of the build, and congratulations for their finish with Rob Lucci. And talking about Marshal.D.Teach, we got Joffrey's version of the Marshal.D.Teach leader here. And I will say we don't have a lot of build variety for this deck, right? We have to play like our 40 Blackbeard cards, and we have a little bit of tech options, right? Most people I've been seeing in it have been using it for like cost reductions, right? I've been seeing some Tempest kicks and cards like that. But I do like the, Laboon, I think already does a lot of that, so we don't need the card. Finger Pistol's been pretty popular too. It's even, I think the 5-cost part for this is actually really impactful. A lot of people are playing 5-cost right now to get around 4-cost Trafalgar Law's removal potential. So because of that, the being able to get rid of a 5-cost with Finger Pistol is really nice. Black Hole is fine for what it does, and it does help you sometimes go for game for just disabling a blocker for 4. But the fact that you can't get rid of a 5-cost with this card without additional removal is a little bit tough. So the other card I've been seeing show up a little bit is Shockwave. And I do want to mention and kind of correct a previous video and just kind of iteration of the build for this website in general. We had a previous issue with the image for this card. The effect text has been right, but it is only KOing a cost of 3 or less on the counter effect, and then the trigger effect is a cost of 4 or less. So if this card was able to, you leave 2 Dawn open, you're able to get rid of a Doflamingo 4-drop would be really strong. I still think this card is great, and there's a lot of like 3s and lowers that you are worth getting rid of from this deck, but it's a little bit less good than it used to. What I was thinking last time I saw this when I made a video with someone playing Shockwave. So but the trigger effect is good. We have a lot of triggers out of our life that lets us, one, just gain advantage. So the my era begins, the Shockwave, but also the Black Hole and the Finger Pistol, that just gets a lot of removal potential. You'll likely hit at least one of these from your 5 life in a game, which can help you kind of turn the tide for it, and then the rest of the deck we kind of know as well. So I don't have a lot to say. I do want to see how Blackbeard kind of finishes this meta. I do know it gets stronger in OP10, at least card pool wise, but it's something that I think didn't get started as much in the North American version of our meta right now. And I want to see when we get our treasure cups in the next couple weeks if Teach is going to get any better as well. But this is the build here, and congratulations to Joffrey for their finish with Teach. And then next up we've got Enel. So this is Wally's version of the build. We're able to get, I believe they got top 16 with this one, right? Yeah, they were able to get top 16 with it. But Enel's been a really interesting leader in this meta, where it has a really good Doflamingo matchup, which is a not guaranteed, but I'm going to bet that it is the most present leader that was in this tournament in general. So, and obviously it's really good because it got first and second place and the highest in the top 32. So when you have a good matchup into the strongest deck in the format, you do feel really good and confident about it. And the issue is that there's a lot of matchups outside of that Doflamingo where you're just like a -1, -2. It's just uphill for most of the battle. Not necessarily unwinnable. And I think Enel does have like that obnoxious leader effect that means that you can almost win every game just if you have the luck that you need, or if your opponent doesn't respect what cards can come out of your life. But other than that, I think the consistency issue is a little bit tough, or some decks are just able to remove your high-end cards while also kind of putting a lot of pressure on the board too. So one thing I'll mention is that I do see a lot more people play Shirahoshi. This was kind of like a 2 of for a lot of people, but I think most people have kind of upgraded this to a 4 cost, which is really strong. I have been seeing Bonnie off and on for an addition for this deck right now. The amount of card draw you get is really nice and kind of forces your opponent to kind of counter out of an effect early. And then, if they do, then you can kind of have like this do they, don't they with Gadatsu, which is kind of nice. And we just have a lot of removal options too with the 4 copies of Nami, 4 copies of the Rocket Luffy, and then we have the 4 big copies of Kingdom Come too. So there's just a lot of removal potential. We try to get to the late game. Obviously, this is really good for something like Doflamingo, and if you keep them at 3 life and you're at 1, Yamato gets rid of a 4-drop every turn and heals you, which is eventually just going to outvalue what Doflamingo is going to try to do. So it's just kind of a shame that this deck doesn't have a more even matchup spread to help it out, but you do, if you queue up into the most popular leader in the game right now, you do have a good chance to win that, and that does help a lot. But again, you're a yellow leader, right? You're used to luck, so that is kind of a factor for it as well. So we'll see how it does. I also know that it's been getting a little bit more popular with the release of EBO2 in Asia, so we'll see how it does there. But I don't think Enel's ever really going anywhere by itself. It's just got such a good effect, and it's just someone always has a chance to do well with it too. So this week it is Wally with their build, and congratulations for their top 16 with the Enel. And then for our last 3 leaders, we do have Nami. So we've got 2 in the top 32. We've got RandomDutchMan as well as Dan39 with their 2 builds. They are pretty similar. I will say the newest tech that we have for Nami is the Nami card, the 1-drop from OP09. The fact that this does let you draw a blue event off the top 5 cards of your deck is super good, especially since the best cards in our deck are blue event cards, which is really strong. Other than that, Nami hasn't changed quite a lot since the release, especially with the release of OP09. One thing I'll mention on RandomDutchMan is we are playing, I'll say, the swag copy of Usopp, which is really interesting to see. This, is a bit of a meme card for me because it's like the only blue card with Rush right now. So you always have to be like, oh, if they're playing Usopp, even though like very, 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 very few people are. But just the fact that this card exists means you have to be cognizant of it. I also will say you'll see both these builds are playing quite a few copies of Boodle. So RandomDutchMan's playing 3 copies of it, as well as Dan playing a full 4 copies of it. It's really interesting to see this. It is kind of just like a 2-drop blocker, but it's gonna. I think the on-KO effect happens quite a bit too. Just means your opponent kind of has to deal with it, even though I think blockers aren't super strong right now. They think there's a lot of removal or interaction with them in general, but for like a 2-drop East Blue blocker, I think it's fine for what it is. It's just really interesting to see. Like this card is not super common Nami builds, and so for both of our top 32 players to be playing a good amount of copies of it, I think is remarkable and worth noting too. So other than that, you guys probably have your own opinions on Nami if you hate it or love it. Most people hate it, but a lot of people love it too. And it's interesting to see it's in this. I know Doflamingo is a really tough matchup for it in this meta. So to see 2 get in the top 32, I think is better than average from what we've been seeing, and it's going to be interesting to see if Nami is able to get any kind of stability in this meta in general. But again, these are our builds. This is from RandomDutchMan and also Dan, and congratulations for their top 32 finishes. The next up we've got Betty, which this is Mitch's version of the deck, and this is one like I'm coping for Red Purple Luffy, right? That's the deck that I still think is surprised it hasn't topped in any of these events yet. I do think it's strong enough to at least get an X2 finish and bubble into one of these top 32s, but I know a lot of people have been talking about Betty. It did get a lot of, I would say, indirect support, right? I think some of the Revolution Army stuff was supposed to be for something else, but Betty will definitely take advantage of it, right? And the fact that we have this Karasu here as a blocker that also get to play off your life, the fact that we also have this Koala, which is also a blocker that lets you kind of play something off your life too. You just got a lot of value from this kind of deck existing. And I think like kind of like the inverse of Enel, where like the fact that the Doflamingo matchup is your best one, you're able to succeed. Betty's kind of like the opposite, where the Doflamingo matchup is really tough for you, right? They kind of do the same thing you do, but they have removal, are ways to interact with your board. Your kind of deal with Betty is just make some big numbers and attack really quickly, right? So there are some more like slower decks that do have issues with that, especially some 4 life leaders. That extra life deficit is really hurtful when you're playing against a very aggressive deck like this. So Betty has like a really good matchup spread into a lot, I think, of the top decks at times, but Doflamingo is not one of those, and that's what hurts it quite a bit. So I don't know if I don't know. This is definitely not like my play style of a deck in general, so it's hard to be a little bit unbiased on my opinions on this deck. But like I think that it's something that can top. I'm not surprised to see it top, but the consistency with it is not super high. Like sometimes you just win because you see Emporio into double Karasu, but no one's gonna beat that deck, right? It reminds me a lot like of like Vinsmoke, where if you're able to find your Yonjis and not your Ichis, sorry, your Ichis, and get like your rushes and stuff. Like not a lot of decks can answer like 7k rush cards on like turn 3, but you're not going to see that every time, and the times when you don't, you feel really kind of bad about it. So it's tough to say how I feel about this deck in particular. I'm not surprised it topped once again, but I don't think it's going to be doing much better than getting the occasional like top 16 off like an X2 kind of finish. So, but I do think it's really impressive to see it get this far. Congratulations to Mitch on their run with Belo Betty, and we'll see if it gets any more tops in the next couple weeks. And then to wrap it up, as kind of mentioned like a long time ago at the beginning of this video, we've got Shanks, and Shanks is slowly growing on me as a leader. When I first started the OP09 meta, I had a hard time kind of adjusting to the best way to play it. And especially since you got to play so many cards without counter. Like we are playing 19 cards in this deck without counter. Now, technically 2 of them are Kick Course and 3 of them are Red Hawk, right? So we've got like 14, but or what? If you want to count these as like half ones, I don't know how to really evaluate those, but it is a deck where you have a lot of different options for a lot of different situations, especially this build too. You'll see that we have a lot of different unique cards in this deck. We got 1 copy of like Building Snake. We've got like the Silvers, the Lucky Roo, the Yasop. We also have the Marco and the Ace. Both of these are very strong. We've got the Beckman. We've got so much removal too, including the Newgate, the Dragon, the Silvers, which this card's been I'm really happy with this card right now. There's so many times where I feel like this just wins a lot of matchups, or at least buys you the turn you need to be able to set up and be like a little bit greedy, and then after that you're able to just kind of stabilize, which is really strong. So I think Silvers has been really strong for red in general. And then you've got the 10 cost Shanks, as well as the OP06 version of 10 cost Shanks 2 for some removal and rush, and then 1 copy of the Goldie Roger. So again, like we have so many different ways to access cards, or like so many different cards to answer a lot of situations, and the only issue with it is that we have like no real consistency to get there, right? We're only playing 3 copies of Uta, which is only able to find the Beckman, the Shanks, and that's about it. It's really unfortunate that like this, I like lore wise I get it, I know why Uta can't do it, but it's things that we're not able to find or Silvers Rayleigh, right? Like either of these cards, if they were searchable, this deck would be like immediately like half a step better, I think. And I still think Shanks is strong. It's just like that lack of consistency is really hurtful for a deck like this one. So I do hope that I think we will see a little bit more of Shanks, but it's also a deck when your opponent knows how to play against it, it gets a little bit worse. This is kind of like a pseudo 6k leader on defense with its once per turn effect. So when your opponent really knows the best way to kind of pressure you and kind of get cards out of your hand and play around an effect like that, I think this deck does get worse, and it's a little bit harder for you to perform on some of your like middling hands where you can still win, but you kind of have to still like outvalue your opponent somehow. So I still like this deck. It's been growing on me as mentioned, but I do like the lack of consistency at times for finding our late game cards, and it's so easy to just kind of have like 6 cards in hand with no counter, and that just kind of feels bad. So I don't know, we'll see how Shanks does. I still believe in it. It's a really cool deck, and congratulations to Frank for their top 32 with Shanks and getting this leader in the top 32 in the first place. So that's going to be it though for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. I know I rambled a little bit more, but again, there's some really cool leaders I'm happy that we were able to see, and I want to just kind of make this video as soon as I can too. So that's going to be it for me. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to let me know what leaders you're looking forward to in the rest of this format, and I'll catch you all next time.